Okay, guys. Well, apparently nobody could make it again tonight, so I'm going to record this section again, and then we can pass it on through to you in the week, and you can pick up from there. I need some work off most of you urgently now because we're getting closer to the deadline for the EQA to come in. So I would like you all to make a start, at least on the workbook for Unit 1, to try and get each of the sections finished. I'm just going to look quickly at the end of Unit 1, which was looking at the legalities of the process, the legal and good practice requirements for the internal quality assurance of assessment. So it's asking for an evaluation of legal issues, policies and procedures relevant to the internal quality assurance of assessment, including those for health and safety and welfare. When IQA takes place, the plan's got to be in place, assessors have to be notified, and the processes that the assessor goes through with the learners has to be covered under health and safety and welfare. This means that there's got to be risk assessments done where necessary for peripatetic assessors that are out in the workplace, and of course not to put too much pressure on people to get work done at the end of a process when it should be being done on a trittle feed, as we've discussed earlier. Evaluate different ways in which technology can contribute to the internal quality assurance process. Nowadays, most material can be scanned into a system and passed electronically to either the assessor from the candidate or the learner, or from the assessor, of course, to the IQA. If an IQA has presented the assessors with an assessment, with a quality assurance plan, which units are going to be observed or looked at by the IQA, then it should be that all is possible and workable. Explain the value of reflective practice and continuing professional development in relation to internal quality assurance. Well, quite honestly, this is no different to any form of reflective practice that you do as a teacher, as an assessor, and certainly as an IQA. And that is looking backwardly at what you've done, what you've set in place, and what you've done in practice. And it's just like any cycle. You review what's been done. Has it worked? Has it not worked? Are there things that can be improved? One of the things that technology has done is allowed things to be done piece by piece rather than leaving stuff right to the end of a program, which puts pressure on everybody, and sometimes things get missed. So reflective practice is highly important in looking at what you're doing, evaluating in a reflective way how that can be improved or made simpler. Quite often I've seen quality assurance systems which look extremely robust, and when you actually check into them, you find that lots of things are missing. Documents aren't filled in, some are only partially filled in, the signature's missing, the dates are not on, all sorts of things that are wrong with it, purely because although it may be robust, it's not really workable, and people have not time to consume filling triple documents out to try and achieve the same result. One of the ways that I have changed the front sheet document so that it can be made into an assessment document is a part of that. It's reflecting what paperwork there was and seeing that it could be condensed into one sheet rather than having 2 or 3 sheets of paper available, which weren't necessary. And finally, evaluate the requirements for equality and diversity where appropriate. This is where adjustments can be made, or reasonable adjustments can be made for learners in different situations. Maybe they have some sort of disability, which can be got round to include them. And sometimes bilingualism will help, where you may need to use a translator to make sure that the candidate fully understands what they've got to do. Maybe that their English is okay, but you must make sure, certainly in practical assessments, that people know exactly what they've got to do. So that was just wanted to cover off that the last part of LO6, as I went over it quite quickly last week. Okay, I will shut that down. Yes. Oh, we now look at Unit 2. I'm going to bring the suggested evidence sheet up, because it doesn't change much on this, but it tells you basically on here what we need to produce, because this is majorly a practical exercise. If you look on the front sheet here, Unit 2, internally assure the quality assessment. So this is saying do it. It's not asking you about it. It is internally assure the quality of assessment. So the first one is plan monitoring activities according to the requirements of your own role. So that's copies of sampling plans. Literally, you can refer to that in your work because you've spoken in Unit 1. But this will be a sampling plan for some activities with at least 2 assessors, and they will be having work from at least 2 candidates. When it says at least, 2 will do. 2 is plenty. You don't need to go to 3 or 4 or anything, because you've got the availability of material. So make arrangements for internal monitoring activities to take place. Copies of internal monitoring correspondence. Again, you can refer to it in your workbook. Where you actually made your plans made, obviously you've got to inform people about it. Tell people when it's going to take place, what you require from them, and when. So the documentation basically on there needs to be transmitted to the people involved. So it then carry out internal monitoring activities of quality requirements. Right, okay, so copies of your monitoring documentation. That will be IQA reports. It could be for external assessors, a visit to a candidate where you will observe the assessor doing an observation or other means of assessment, such as professional discussion with the candidate. Once that's finished, you may decide to interview the candidate to find out how it went from their point of view and record that interview. And there are some documents in the BLE that will show how we actually do that. It's a question and answer list, really. Evaluate assessor expertise and competence in relation to the requirements of the role. So again, it's copies of any training, needs analysis that's been done for your assessors, experienced or inexperienced, etc., and refer to this again in your workbook. But on where you're evaluating assessor, you'll have a training needs analysis sheet for the 2 assessors that you've got that will show what training they've had and what training may need or may be outstanding. It may be some CPD work that they've decided to do to improve the assessment process. So evaluate the planning and preparation of the assessment process. This is where copies of your assessor feedback with the rationale from why you made that decision, and any conversational any recorded conversation you've had with the assessor about the plans and preparation before the assessment took place. 2.4, determine whether assessment methods are sage, valid, fair, and reliable. Copies of AQA decisions in your report and why you made those decisions. Looking at the assessment methods, are they the correct one for that particular, are the most commonly used one for that particular piece of assessment, or to gather that evidence? Are they fair? Are they being used across the board? In other words, are your assessors using the same assessment methods for all candidates? Are they valid in terms of is it the learner's work? And finally, are they reliable? Are they meeting the assessment criteria and the learning objectives of the particular qualification? Again, this is the second part of that, determine whether assessment decisions are made using the specific criteria. Again, a copy of your IQA feedback report. Again, it will make sure that you assess purely against the specific criteria and not use any other criteria that may be in your head about the qualification. As a teacher assessor, you may use material that is not there. Sometimes this happens. One of the ways, or one of the reasons that I adopted the change in sheet, is that the assessment, or the piece of summative assessment, goes against each criteria, so that there's no equivocation there about whether it's made using specific criteria, because the assessment is made actually against it. Again, compare assessor decisions to ensure they're consistent. So this looks at standardisation. You would have to hold a standardisation meeting with your two assessors. You would use, the general practice would be to issue a small piece of learner work to both of them and let them determine how they're going to assess it, and make an assessment on that work and determine whether they would actually accept it or whether they would reject it or refer it. So copies of those meeting minutes, again, comparing assessor decisions, suggested evidence, and again, you can refer to it in your workbook at Unit 1 as well. 3.1, provide assessor feedback with advice and support, including professional development opportunities which help them to maintain and improve the quality of their assessment. So your IQA report should have all these sections on it. What you can put in the summative box at the bottom, this one here, actions needed to achieve the learning objectives with standard, that will go in there. Any actions needed from your assessor will go in there. Again, it could refer to CPD that's happening. The whole opportunities for CPD within there. Some assessors, after they've gained sufficient experience, will obviously want to look at becoming IQA themselves and doing this course. It could be that some assessors are not completely au fait with the documentation and would need some support with regard to how that is filled in and how it actually meets the requirement, how it's made to meet the requirements of the particular qualification. Again, apply procedures to standardise assessment practices and outcomes. So again, it's copies of meeting minutes, use of control units, etc. One of the standardising things within assessments is to look at, and these are mainly with qualifications with more than 4 units in them. You would select perhaps one unit. This could be Unit 1, or it could be a specific unit that has some detail in it that you want to make sure was covered. And you would then, in your assessment plan, make sure that this unit was covered by each candidate, so that you've sampled that unit each time against a candidate. It also looks at your assessor's decisions on that and why they've made those decisions with regard to that particular unit across the board. that looks at fairness, of course. 4, apply procedure for recording, storing and reporting information in regard to IQA. And again, copies of your centre file information. This is how you receive work from your assessors. One of the things that happens with the assessors in our case is that work goes into learner work at ukversity.co.uk. That is forwarded then to the particular assessors, so that the IQA for that group knows what the number of students or learners in that qualification are, who's producing what work and when it's coming in. It's then stored in a particular area. In our case, it's electronically. There will be also a time set for returning that information by the assessors and also by the IQA. So the IQA will have a plan to bring work in, to make the assurance check on it, and then return the work back as soon as possible. And there will be, in the centre file, there will be a time limit for that. And again, follow procedure to maintain confidentiality. This is done differently in electronic storage and in hard copy storage. On electronic storage, it's easier in that it's stored in one place and only people will have access to that documentation and information. Paper-based ones do present a little more of a problem because there are paper-based portfolios. They take up room, so there's got to be somewhere for them specifically, and that must be kept under lock and key with obviously only one person or two people that have got access to it. Clause 3 is explaining relevant procedures regarding disputes about the quality of the assessment. Again, you could refer to Unit 1 if you're fully explained in your appeals procedure and complete in your explanation in your workbook. So that's looking at the dispute procedure for or the appeals procedure by candidates or learners that want to appeal against decisions. Of course, an assessor can appeal against an IQA decision, but in my experience, I've never had that happen because usually the assessor has got less experience in the IQA and they can usually discuss it at that level and come to an agreement on it without it going any further into any procedure. That's been my experience anyway. Again, this totals up to actually 4.2. Evaluate what requirements you have for information management, data protection and confidentiality. So look, you get complete an evaluation of that really, looking at what the procedures are when they come in and out, what the time limits are on them, whether they're reasonable. Make an evaluation basically of the management process that we have for, or that you have for that particular thing to happen. Apply requirements for equality and diversity where appropriate, bilingualism, in relation to IQA. Again, it may be that the IQA wants to interview a candidate. It may be that you refer to what the diversity and equality policy that you've got. Bilingualism is relevant in certain qualifications, but not in others. It may be if you are doing an academic qualification, the requirements of the course may insist that you have English at a certain level before you can actually go on to that course. It is a barrier, but in those cases, it's a barrier that has to be there, but otherwise they wouldn't be able to cope with the work, simple as that. But certainly, the IQA must make sure that equality and diversity are maintained where appropriate. So again, we're looking at a critical reflection, as in Unit 1, of your own practice in internally assuring the quality assessment. So a clinical reflection of your own practice, and you basically just say, I have a certain amount of experience, I've done this, this and this, I do this a certain way because, and just reflect on that. And again, sometimes during that reflection process, you can see areas which possibly could be improved. But I find reflection is a longer process. You do things for a certain amount of time in a certain manner, sometimes because of external pressures, and it's only later when you reflect on it and think, you know, we don't need to do that, or this is a backlog time. We need to find some way of getting round that backlog and making sure that the work comes in, or the IQA is done piece by piece rather than as a whole process at the end. Some learning programs now have specific dates for assessment and specific dates for initial IQA to check on that everything is, you know, working smoothly. Again, maintain the coverage of your own expertise and competence in internally assuring the quality of assessment. Show you where your CPDs in relation to the IQA process. Use your reflective resource and refer to it in your work. We can also, quite often, awarding bodies will put on, well, they do put courses on for IQA, which don't lead to a qualification, but are similar to this process of the sessions we've been doing on here. So, but sometimes they are for, or I've found they are for new IQAs and new assessors rather than experienced ones that have been at it for a while. And sometimes I think that's wrong. I think they should put ones on for specifically for senior or more experienced IQAs to actually get together and look at what practices they use and see where you can improve. I've always found that working with a large group of people makes a big difference when you think about what you do. So as you can see, this is a shorter unit. We've only got 5 learning objectives, and a lot of them in there are all about the documentation that you use. So it's really just producing the documentation with an explanation. So copies of all your assessors and their candidates' work, supplemented with explanations in your workbook. All learning outcomes in this unit must be assessed using the methods appropriate for the candidate IQA, that's you, performance, and they must include an observation of performance. If you cannot get anybody from where you are to do an observation of your performance, we will have to arrange for me to do that. Examination of work products of those learners, what questioning techniques have been used. Direct evidence in this case can be supplemented where necessary with professional discussion, reflective accounts or a witness testimony. With using any witness testimonies though, it must be that the witness intent must know the standards of which they're giving testimony on. It's not just for them to be, oh, I'll give an instance, it could be a qualified maintenance fitter that is giving evidence that his apprentice has completed this work to a particular standard and it's absolutely spot on. It may be for him, but it may not cover the qualification assessment criteria. This is what I mentioned earlier about only using assessment criteria for the assessment process. So evidence must come from IQA candidate performance in the work environment. There must be evidence of IQA candidate monitoring, a minimum of 2 assessors, and with each with a minimum of 2 candidates for a qualification being taught or delivered. So again, to facilitate observation of your practice, you could video it actually. Say a video of you giving verbal feedback to one of your assessors, or a video of you actually doing an observation, or whatever it is you can use, and that video can then be sent on or sent to me, and I can actually do it from here, again using technology. Again, where you refer to Unit 1 for any of your evidence, identify the workbook page numbers which matches. Let's get rid of that, don't need it on there. So, on that note, that covers most of what I wanted to do tonight, because Unit 2 is a lot more straightforward. You've done most of the work in Unit 1. All the answers in your workbook will be comprehensive. If you remember, we don't use bullet points at all. They need to be full explanations or full analyses or evaluations, whatever it asks for in there, they must be done and completed. This is actually looking at the practical evidence that's surfaced during that operation, really, and then using that to explain how you've done it. Just a quick response about how I changed the document on this to make it easier for everybody. There used to be this assignment front sheet, and it just said where your evidence was and whether you had achieved it or not. And then there was a full assessment documentation that ran alongside it. If you change the no, not yet achieved, when it has achieved, to page number, and just put the page numbers in of where the evidence is for each of these things in your portfolio. And then at the bottom, all this can come out, and you can put your summative assessment in there, yeah? So for guidance on assessors, the aim of this unit is to assess the candidate's performance, assuring the quality of assessment from within an organisation or an assessment centre. Yeah, so that says it in a word. Okay, guys, I am going to close at that point now. Of course, if there's any of these recordings that you do, if you've got any questions about them, but please send them through. I'll be working at home all this week, and I want to gather some assessment work in from you so that I can get this done. As I said, we've got the EQA visit coming up shortly, and I want to get as much work in as possible before that occurs. Okay, thanks for listening. I will close the meeting now, and thanks for your attendance later.